WION continues to bring you all the latest on coronavirus. While many countries are struggling to contain the coronavirus infection, Taiwan has been able to set an example of how to contain the outbreak. With just under 50 cases of infection and 1 death reported to date, more than 40% of the infected individuals have recovered. Though the island state is only 81 miles away from mainland China, Taiwan has now managed to stem what could have been a crisis. On December 31st, when Chinese officials had notified the World Health Organization that China had several then unknown cases of pneumonia, the same day Taiwanese Center for Disease Control began monitoring passengers who arrived in the country from Wuhan. Less than a week later, the government began monitoring people who had traveled from Wuhan since around December 20th. In mid-January, Taiwan had sent a team of experts on fact-finding mission to China, even though relations between the two countries are less than cordial. Later, the government had ramped up safety and health protocols even further. By late January, Taipei established a central epidemic command center, centralizing policy measures to protect public health. 124 safety protocols were also implemented. On January 26th, Taiwan became the first country to ban flights from Wuhan. Around the same time, the government banned the export of face masks and ensured they were affordable by capping prices at less than $1 each. By late February, Taipei distributed nearly 6.5 million masks to primary and secondary schools, 84,000 liters of hand sanitizer and 25,000 forehead thermometers. Taiwan has been barred from attending the annual WHO Assembly since 2017 due to objections by Beijing. Now, the country was even excluded from WHO emergency meetings on coronavirus, despite calls from Canada and Japan asking the global health body to allow Taiwan to participate. Another example of how Taipei managed to stop the infection from spreading is the use of phone tracking to enforce mandatory quarantine. Experts say effective control in Taiwan can be attributed to the use of technology, a central command center, its single-player healthcare system and swift decision-making. It is partially the result of 2003 SARS outbreak that killed 73 people in Taiwan and stunted their economy. Since then, the government has learned its lesson. Taiwan had placed temperature monitors in airports to screen travelers for fever, which is a symptom of COVID-19. Travelers can also report their travel and health history with a QR code, helping the government ascertain infection risk based on flight origin and travel. So clearly, now Taiwan has become a sort of case study for other countries which are battling the crisis. Let's get in a sense of ground zero. I'm joined in by William Yang, who is East Asia correspondent for DW News. He's joining me live from Taipei. Let's quickly go across to William. William, a very warm welcome to you and thank you for joining us on this broadcast. Now, let me begin by asking you, how's life in Taipei at the moment? We believe it's quite a contrast to many cities in China, which have now, of course, turned into ghost towns.
Right, indeed. So like you just introduced, since the very beginning, the level of anxiety was actually rather high because of the memory that people here mostly have about the SARS epidemic. But because of, the government stepped in and really introduced a strain of very, very coordinated centralized measures so that the people started to feel a lot more safer about trusting what the government is doing. And also the government has been very transparent about the numbers and the updates every day through the daily briefing. And so that has really helped to restore the public's confidence in the everyday life here.
Right. William, now Taiwan is barely 80 miles away from mainland China, which has been the center of the outbreak, and yet it has less than 50 coronavirus cases. Actually, experts are calling Taiwan a case study in terms of its containment. How has the island nation managed to contain the virus?
So like what you just said, the government is keeping a very, very up-to-date tracking of all the possible people coming in from countries where there have been outbreaks. And the government is also being very decisive about to ban flights and entry of any visitor from places starting with China, Hong Kong, Macau, and now expanded to Italy and South Korea. So, and at the same time, the use of technology is really playing a very crucial role for the government to be able to really be able to track and update all their database at an up-to-date and 24/7 hour cycle, so that they will be able to make sure that no leakage is possible with, even though, like flights are continuing coming into Taiwan from Europe and also the US and other parts of the world where cases have been much higher than Taiwan.
Right. William, do you think that the diplomatic isolation from China has worked in Taiwan's favor, especially in terms of enforcing effective controls?
So the isolation of Taiwan rather actually helped Taiwan in a way that China banned all the Chinese tourists to come to Taiwan. In the past, we would get millions of Chinese tourists coming here every year. But since last year, when the Chinese government introduced that ban, that actually reduced the risk of in the beginning, the virus being imported from China. And then ever since then, the isolation actually didn't really play a difference in terms of how the Taiwanese government is being able to track and monitor all the incoming traffic into Taiwan. So I would say that the key is really in the beginning that the amount of the Chinese tourists have reduced a lot. And that actually in some ways helped Taiwan to really stay away from the risk.
Absolutely. A timely reaction coming in from Taiwan has, of course, reduced the risk. But in the current outbreak, Taiwan has been excluded from WHO emergency meetings on the coronavirus. In fact, since 2017, Taiwan has been barred from attending the annual World Health Assembly, which many blame on Beijing's lobbying. Has this exclusion now become a sore point for Taiwan?
In fact, it actually has helped the current government to be able to use Taiwan's experience as a way to really persuade the international community to, come behind its support and rally for its inclusion into the WHO. And as we see, many other countries have all spoken out for Taiwan's favor and really calling on the WHO to include Taiwan because they believe that Taiwan's experience can actually help other countries who are currently struggling to find a very useful way and to actually combat this outbreak.
All right. It's interesting that you mentioned technology and how it aided the country in controlling the virus. Could you also take us through that?
Right. So the use of technology has become a very essential way for Taiwanese people to access all the updated information. The government not only combines the national healthcare data with the border control data, so they can actually already track all the Taiwanese people's travel history, but at the same time, they also include these data for them to be able to better assess where are the highest number of the risk coming into Taiwan, so that they will be able to assess, like the priority of their travel bans and also the warnings that they are going to use in terms of for the domestic audience and the people to advise them not to travel to certain parts of the world. So I think these are the ways that Taiwanese government is able to actually stay ahead of the curve of the outbreak.
Absolutely. And last but not the least, William, what can other countries like India and, of course, the Europe itself, what can these countries now who are also struggling to manage the COVID-19 epidemic learn from Taiwan?
I think the biggest thing is, especially for India or the EU, where it's such a vast majority of the population and also the land, is that the government needs to be very decisive and realize that they need to sacrifice certain level of the freedom that the people normally enjoy, but at the same time make sure that they communicate the intention of these temporary restrictions to the audience very well, so that it's not going to have any public pushback. I believe that the Taiwanese government played both roles very well, so that they were able to actually be able to have the public be receptive towards having certain level of their freedom being taken away, but at the same time feeling very safe and confident in the government's decision making.
Absolutely. William, on that note, thank you so much for bringing in your perspective. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you for joining us here at WION.
Thank you for having me.